The attorney said it the way a man reads a supply list, flat factual, without any awareness that the words were rearranging the last 3 months of her life. The defendant contends that Mr. Calloway's payment of the original debt was not an act of charity, but a legal instrument, specifically designed to establish marital standing as co-plaintiff in the water rights claim filed in this court on the 14th of March. Delilah did not move. Ryder was seated to her left with his hands flat on the table. She didn't look at him. Didn't look at Frame either, Aldous Frame, a thin man with ink-stained fingers who delivered sentences the way a post driver delivers a fence post, perpendicular, efficient, no consideration for what was already in the ground. She looked at the judge's bench. Magnus Cade sat 12 feet to her right at the opposing table. She'd been aware of him since entering the room. The way you are aware of something cold, not looking at it, knowing it is there. Frame turned a page. She had been mending fence in her mind. Every morning, for 3 months, waking before Ryder standing at the kitchen door in the half-dark, deciding which section needed work. The south pasture posts were soft at the base. The east line sagged where the wire had been strung too loose. There was always something. She had been building something inside those mornings, something she hadn't named, because it felt too new and too fragile, and she had never in her life owned a thing that lasted. The defendant further contends that Mrs. Calloway entered the arrangement without full knowledge of its legal design, rendering her participation in these proceedings not voluntary testimony, but a product of deliberate instrumentalization. She kept her hands folded in her lap and thought, he has never lied to you. Think carefully. Think about every word he has ever said, and tell me where the lie is. She was still thinking when the judge asked if the plaintiff's representative was prepared to proceed. Across the table, Ryder's attorney looked at her. Not at Ryder. At her. Somewhere to the right, Magnus Cade reached over with 2 fingers and adjusted his left cufflink. Small motion. Precise. The gesture of a man who is comfortable and expects to remain so. She caught it from the corner of her eye. Said nothing. The judge called a short recess. Ryder stood. She heard the chair scrape and was already moving side door, the corridor, the smell of wood and old paper. The door closed behind her. Empty corridor. She stood with her back against the wall and looked at the opposite wall, which was blank, which was correct. After a moment, she looked at her hands. Steady. That was either good character or bad feeling. She'd never been certain which. He didn't follow her. She'd known he wouldn't. Something in the way he'd crossed the room deliberate without urgency. A man who understood the difference between pursuing and pressing. He would give her the distance. He always had. She was grateful for it. Furious at herself for being grateful. 30 seconds. Then she went back inside. He was where she'd left him, standing beside the table, with his hat in both hands. He looked up. She sat down, looked at the judge's bench, heard him settle into the chair beside her. The session resumed. 3 months prior. The south pasture. The wind off the plateau came in low and horizontal and didn't stop. A week of it. The kind of wind that frays things, dry grass, fence posts, the patience of anyone trying to do careful work with wire. Delilah had the come-along braced against the third post from the corner. Her hands were bleeding a little where the wire had slipped, no gloves, a mistake made once. She worked the tension slowly, watching the wire lift the line, correct itself. Boots on hard ground behind her. A tin cup appeared on top of the post. She smelled the coffee before she looked. Ryder went back toward the north end without a word. She took the cup. Already, the right temperature. Not scalding, not cooled to suggest waiting. Just right for the walk from the house. She drank half and kept working. She knew which cup was hers without checking. A small dent in the rim from a night it fell off the stove. She hadn't told him. He'd noticed. In the courtroom, that was the thing she was turning over. Not whether the gesture was real. She knew it was real. She was asking what a real gesture cost a man who was keeping count. She hadn't had an answer when it happened. She was starting to. Frame set the paperwork on the exhibit table with the care of a man who understood its value. Plaintiff's Exhibit 3. The original debt documentation. The plaintiff's signature, third page below the terms of the arrangement with the defendant. He moved 1 page to the right. Plaintiff's Exhibit 4. The contract marriage agreement. 9 days later. The plaintiff's signature below the terms of the arrangement with one Ryder Calloway. Both documents flat on the table. He stepped back. The gallery went quiet, in the way of a room full of people pretending not to pay close attention. Delilah leaned forward an inch too, looked at Exhibit 3, her own signature on Cade's paperwork in her own hand, with the pressure she put on the loop of her last name when she was writing fast and not looking at what she was signing. She remembered the pen, remembered standing in that office with Buck Tanner's boots on the floor behind her, and making herself stop, shaking before she wrote. She looked at Exhibit 4. Same hand, different pressure. She had taken her time with that one. She looked at both until she understood what she was looking for, the difference between them. What made them different? Whether there was anything at all that did. No answer she could hand to Frame across the exhibit table. One she could keep. To her right, Cade adjusted his left cufflink. Before reading from Exhibit 4, Frame paused, half a breath. She noticed it the way you notice a sound that stops when it should have continued, a clock, a wind, a drip. He read. The moment closed. It wouldn't explain itself, not yet. 6 weeks prior, the eastern water tank. The tank had a slow leak below the waterline, a seam patched before, and not held. Ryder found it by sound. Not the obvious sound of running water, but the specific absence of weight. A full tank makes when wind presses against it. First evening, draining it to working level. Second, welding the seam with what the toolbox had. Third evening, she brought coffee out and stood at the edge of the lamplight and watched him work. He didn't look up, thanked her for the coffee before he registered saying it. Awareness already in his hands before it arrived in his voice. He worked with the attention he brought to everything on the land. Methodical. Not hurrying. Not performing. After a few minutes, she asked, "How long has it been leaking?" "Still working. Since before we came." "You found it first week?" "Yes." She waited. Nothing more. He kept working. She went back inside. What she had concluded that evening, he does not need credit. He can be trusted with things I am not watching. He can be trusted. In the courtroom now, she was examining the architecture of that conclusion. Not its accuracy, she still believed it was accurate. She was examining the speed of it, the ease. She had moved from "he noticed the cup" to "he can be trusted" without identifying where the bridge was. Frame was moving to his next document. She held the question where it was and let it cut. What is the difference between reading someone correctly and reading them usefully? And is there a difference if the person being read understood both things were happening? The recess before this afternoon session lasted 12 minutes. Cade was in the corridor, not blocking her path, simply present to the left of the door, still as a man who had positioned himself with care and wanted her to understand it wasn't accidental. Charcoal wool. Always charcoal wool. "I can have Frame file for discontinuance by 3 o'clock, he said. "You sign 1 page. You walk away from all of it." He didn't wait for a response. Turned. The door closed behind him. She stood in the corridor. The offer was clean. She could see the shape of it, a page, a signature, her freedom from this room and these documents, and the attorney who described her life in the register of Écure. Property transfer. She had wanted clean exit for so long that her body knew what it felt like to want it. The tension in the shoulders. The breath held at 3/4. She held the offer for 2 full beats. Examined it. It was built for who she was before October. Before the coffee on the fence post, before the water tank, before the locked door she had chosen not to open. Cade had done the arithmetic on a woman who no longer existed, and he didn't know it yet, and the fact that he didn't know it was information she hadn't had before she walked into this corridor. She went back inside without signing anything. The refusal was reflexive, but only barely. She needed to know that. She needed it to have been close enough that the refusal was real. Frame filed the procedural motion within the hour. Plaintiff's witness status must be formally established or waived by end of the following session. The judge granted it. 1 session remaining. Ryder's attorney made a note. Ryder was looking at the window. Cade was looking at his documents. Frame, having filed the motion, arranged his papers without looking at anyone. Without looking specifically at Cade. Not the confirming glance of a man who had executed his employer's strategy. Just a man looking at his papers. She held that alongside the half-breath from Exhibit 4. Why does a man who has done this work for 20 years need to look away from the person paying him? Was collecting answers. She didn't have enough of them yet. 8 weeks prior, the back of the ranch house. The door had a heavy lock, not the standard hardware, something deliberate. The door itself was plain, same wood as everything else in the hallway. Nothing marked it except the lock and the fact that it was always closed. She found it on a Saturday when Ryder was working the North Quarter. She tried the handle, once fully the way you test a thing to know what it is. It didn't move. She stood there a moment. The hallway smelled of wood and dust and old iron. Somewhere outside, wind was moving through the grass with the low sound it makes when there's nothing to stop it. Then she went back to the kitchen. She didn't ask him about it at supper, not because she forgot. She had made a decision standing in that hallway not to press, not to demand proof through access. 3 months of watching him work, the coffee, the water tank, the way he stepped around a problem before explaining it, the attention he paid to things that could fail quietly before anyone noticed. She had enough to proceed on. In the courtroom now, she was examining that phrase, enough to proceed on. Not patience, not restraint, a choice, an active exercise of judgment made freely, in a moment she had not recognized as agency because she had so rarely felt the feeling. She had trusted him. That was hers. Whatever the room decided about the rest, whatever Frame put on the exhibit table, whatever Cade's attorney argued, that had been hers. Nobody in this room had made it for her. Frame produced 2 items in the same session within 20 minutes of each other. The first was a land survey, formal certified, establishing that the water rights Ryder had purchased with the property were subject to a pre-existing lien. The purchase potentially challengeable on independent grounds. Nothing to do with the debt payment. Nothing to do with Delilah. A separate line of attack that Frame had been holding since the beginning and had saved for this point. Ryder's attorney stood. The judge allowed 2 minutes to confer. Frame introduced the second document before the conference was finished. A deposition from a clerk in the Territorial Land Office. The clerk had processed Ryder's original case, filing the one that predated everything. Predated the debt, predated Dodge City. The case was filed under a prior name. Ryder Calloway was a name adopted in Kansas. The attorney sat back down. Ryder's face didn't change, not a flicker. He was looking at the bench with the stillness of a man who had known this was coming and had decided, when it arrived, to hold still and let it land. Delilah looked at him. She didn't look away when he turned and met her eyes. 2 seconds. He looked back at the bench. To her right, Cade adjusted his left cufflink. This time she was watching for it. Not nervousness, not habit. Satisfaction. A 1/4 inch of starched linen moved by a man keeping score who had just added a number. She had the south fence, the water tank, the locked door she chose not to open. 3 months of conclusions built from what she could see. She put all of it behind the question, what is he carrying? How long has he been carrying it alone? The judge called a brief pause. During it, not in the corridor, not in whispers, but low enough to stay inside the table, Colcord leaned toward her. 62 years old, 30 of them in territorial law. He had a way of speaking that suggested he had stopped being surprised by people long ago, which meant they still surprised him, and he had learned to keep it off his face. Mrs. Calloway, he looked at her directly. The conditional agreement you instructed me to establish before this proceeding began the one that gives you full authority over your own witness status, independent of Mr. Calloway, or this court's schedule. He paused. Frame doesn't know about it. Cade doesn't know about it. Not an accusation, a reminder, like he thought the last hour might have knocked it loose. You negotiated it yourself before any of this began. What happens next has been your decision since we walked through that door. She already knew. I know, she said. He studied her face, made a note, said nothing else. On her other side, Ryder was very still. She didn't look at him. She was looking at the exhibit table, at both signatures. She was thinking about October 2nd, a long-scarred table and 2 cups of coffee, and a man who had said both, and meant it as the most honest thing he had. She was thinking about what she had decided that morning, and why she had spent 3 days behaving as though she hadn't. The recess was 7 minutes. Ryder came through this door, and she was there, and he stopped. He reached into his coat. The pages were folded in quarters, worn at the creases, not prepared for today. He'd been carrying them longer than this proceeding had been running. She could see it in the paper. He held them out. "It's a record." His posture was entirely still, not performed, but arrived at. The way a man arrives at stillness when he has been holding something back for a long time and has run out of the energy to keep holding. Not a justification. A beat. "You don't owe it your time." She took the pages, put them inside her coat without opening them. He looked at her 2 full seconds, the longest since Frame had read his opening statement. Then he went back inside. She stood in the corridor with her hand flat over the coat pocket. Something carried for a long time has a weight different from something new. She had not asked him what it said, had not asked him even in the weeks before she understood what she was inside, the things that were obviously there to ask. She had built her conclusions from what she could observe. She had decided that was enough. She went back inside. Day 1. The first morning. She woke before light. Old habit, not insomnia, not anxiety. Something older. A body that had learned over enough years that the safest way to move through a house was quietly and early, before anyone else decided what the morning was going to be. The kitchen was lit. Ryder was already there. He looked up when she came in and seemed unsurprised. Put the coffee on without being asked. Sat at the far end of the long table with his hands flat on the wood. She sat at her end. The table between them was scarred and old, and smelled of whatever the previous occupants had cooked in it, over however many years. They sat in silence while the coffee came up. He poured 2 cups, set one at her end, went back to his. "The year starts today," he said. "After 12 months, if you want to go. I'll put you on the stage myself with enough money to reach wherever you're going. That's the contract." He looked at the cup in his hands. "But I want to tell you the rest of it." She waited. "The way I paid the debt, the legal structure, it puts you in a position to help me in a proceeding I've been working toward for 3 years against Cade. I didn't explain that before you decided." He looked at her directly. "I should have. You can leave right now. Today. I won't try to hold the contract. If that changes your answer, it should." She looked at him across the long table. She had been sold 9 days ago. Her brother had done it with the expression he wore when he was doing something he knew was wrong, but had run out of the kind of person who could have stopped him. She had walked from that room into this arrangement because the door was open, and she was still standing when she reached it. But she had walked through it, signed her name with steady hands, ridden 2 days out of Rustfall Creek, and made on the way a series of small private decisions about who she was going to be inside whatever this was. She asked him one question. "Did you choose me because I was convenient, or because you thought I could do it?" He met her eyes directly. Both. A pause, not hesitation, the space a man gives an honest thing. And that's the most honest thing I know how to say. The coffee was getting cold. She stayed. She hadn't known about Eleanor that morning, hadn't known about the prior name, the years of case files behind a locked door, the weight he had been carrying before she arrived, and what it had done to the shape of him. She had known enough. She had made a decision with incomplete information. She had made it freely. In the courtroom now, she understood what she had done that October morning. She had been spending 3 days behaving as though she hadn't done it. That was done now. She walked back into the courtroom. The judge reviewing notes. Frame at his table. The afternoon light through the high windows gone from yellow to something flatter. The session would close within the hour. She sat, took the pages out, unfolded the first page and read 3 lines, folded them back. She didn't need the rest. Frame stood. "The defendant rests, Your Honor." The judge looked up. Plaintiff's representative. Colcord turned to Delilah. Ryder was looking at the bench. She could see from the side what that cost him. The jaw held a fraction too still, hands flat on the table, the deliberate refusal to turn his head in her direction. He would not put his hope in her line of sight and let it function as pressure. She had watched him work for 3 months. She knew what deliberate restraint looked like on him. She knew what it cost. To her right, Cade's hands rested on the table. She waited for the cufflink. He didn't touch it. He was watching her with the complete attention of a man who had done the arithmetic and was waiting for the sum and wasn't certain. She could see it in the very steadiness of his watching. He had been in 2 meetings with her before this proceeding. He had watched her sign documents she couldn't verify. He had built a precise calculation on what that made her. He had built it on the wrong woman. She stood. She told the judge she was prepared to give testimony as the plaintiff's primary witness. She named the date, October 2nd, 1881. She named what Ryder had said, the contract, then the rest of it, the offer to leave. She described the legal structure of the arrangement, as she had understood it when she entered it, incompletely. Then she described what had been disclosed and when. The first morning, before the coffee was finished, before she had made any decision that was irrevocable. Frame's entire case was built on the premise that she hadn't known. She put the disclosure on the record, her words in front of the room. The room went quiet in the way that happens when something suspended finally lands, not the quiet of surprise, something more settled than that. Frame's hand moved toward his legal pad. Stopped. She continued. She described the ranch, not its sentiment, its specifics, the south fence and the wire tension, the water tank and the 2 evenings of welding, the locked door she had tried once and chosen not to press. She named that for what it was, a choice, made freely, to trust rather than demand proof. I was not an instrument, she said. I was a woman who made a decision with the information I had. The information was incomplete. The decision was mine. She didn't raise her voice. The formality of the room carried it. Frame watched her. He had the half-breath from Exhibit 4, the not looking when he filed the motion. He was a man who had chosen to keep doing this work for someone like Cade, had chosen it long enough that the choice had become invisible to him, and now he was watching a woman replace his version of events with the true version in public, on the record, and his face was doing what a face does when a decision repeated quietly for years is finally shown from the outside. It lasted for exactly as long as it takes to finish one sentence. Then he made a note on his legal pad. The moment went into the record and was gone. Cade's hands were still on the table. He didn't reach for the cufflink. He was looking at the exhibit table at both signatures, hers, 9 days apart, and whatever arithmetic he was running, now he was running alone, and the sum was not the one he had calculated. The crowd dispersed in ones and twos, with the energy of people who have witnessed something and are going somewhere to tell someone else about it. Cade left without speaking, without looking at her. Frame collected his documents with the same professional efficiency he had brought to every other part of the day. His face returned to its working expression. Whatever he had allowed himself to feel already filed away. Colcord shook her hand, said something about the filing timeline. She nodded without fully listening, because she was watching the room empty. Ryder was on the courthouse steps when she came through the door. She went down and stopped 4 feet from him. He was holding his hat in both hands. The afternoon light had found him and was doing what it does to a man who has been standing still in it for a few minutes, showing the edges. She reached into her coat and took out the pages, unfolded them fully right there. Read what she hadn't read inside. Longer than she expected. Quieter. Not a defense, not an argument. A sequence of events in a plain hand, the decisions he had made, and why, the moments where he had made them badly, and knew it. Eleanor was in it. The prior name was in it. 3 years of a case built from nothing while working land that offered nothing in return, and a debt arrangement he had seen before he saw her, and a choice made in a Rustfall Creek saloon watching a family reduced to arithmetic. She finished, folded the pages, looked at him. You said both, she said. Not an accusation. When I asked you why you chose me. He waited. I want to know which came first. He was quiet. She could see him thinking, not managing, not calculating thinking, the way a man thinks when he has decided to tell the truth and is working out the shape of it. From somewhere beyond the town line, half a mile, maybe less, a hammer on fence posts. Slow, regular. Someone building something or repairing it or both. The sound that never quite stopped in a country like this, where there was always a line that had come down and needed to go back up. He was still thinking. She could wait. She had gotten very good at reading a man through his relationship to silence. She knew the difference between a man who was stalling and a man who was arriving. He was arriving. A person who has only ever been given terms learns to refuse them. But the harder work comes after, when they have to learn to choose. This is a work of fiction. Names, characters, and events are imaginary. The story is inspired by the American frontier and is intended for entertainment. The emotional experiences depicted reflect universal human truths across time and place.